My name is Paul Wolliver. I'm the owner of Pinellas Power Products. This video is going to be about troubleshooting for my extended run fuel kits. I get occasionally calls from customers who their kit does not work or whatever, or does not work correctly. 95% of the problems are caused by assembly errors and it's sucking air. My kits do not use, and for the purpose of this video, I'm going to be using a Predator just to show the troubleshooting procedure. And the troubleshooting procedure itself is going to be the same on all the generators. The components are going to be different. Like the exact fuel pump that I use on a 212cc engine is going to be different than the one that I use on a 81cc engine or a 360cc engine and so on. And the positive crankcase ventilation valve and other components are going to be different, and they're going to be sized based on the size of the engine. But the operating principle is going to be the same. As I stated earlier, the name of my company is Pinellas Power Products. If you need to get in touch with me, please go to the link in the description section below this video and go to my website and contact me by email or phone. I do not respond to any contacts through YouTube. I do not monitor YouTube. I do not monitor any of the chat rooms or any of the forums. I simply don't have time to monitor all the different venues. So if you email me or call me, you will get me immediately. At any rate, this troubleshooting video is going to cover 95% of the problems that you're going to run into. If you do have a problem that's not covered in this, please don't hesitate to call me. If you have one of my kits, if you have a counterfeit kit, I'm not going to be able to help you, because the counterfeit kits are usually somebody who saw my videos as to how I do it and then has cobbled together a bunch of mishmash parts that may or may not be sized appropriately. Obviously, if you've got a 360cc engine producing a pulse wave to a pump, it's going to act differently than an 80cc engine producing a pulse wave to the pump, and you've got to tune them all together. So just assembling a whole bunch of parts as a mishmash is not going to work. My kits, number one, I start with good quality components. The fuel hose that I use in the kit is a genuine Yamaha fuel hose. The fuel pumps that I use are either genuine Mikuni or genuine Facet. The fuel fittings that I use are Yamaha fuel fittings. And let me show you something here real quick. If you have one of my kits and need to replace a fuel fitting, you do not have to order it from me. You can purchase a Yamaha fuel fitting from your local marina or Bass Pro Shops or, you know, Amazon, whatever. But number one, the Evinrude fuel fittings are totally different size. The Mercury fuel fittings, the diameter of the pickup port is the same, but the length is different, so it's not compatible. You got to use Yamaha style fuel fittings. And let me show you some things about these real quickly. This one is the best of the ones that I have used. You'll notice that there's a slight lip right here on the main fuel port. You'll see that ring. This one, again, you'll see that ring where it gets slightly bigger, where it's pushed into the main body. And this is nothing but this one chrome plated. Then these, you'll see that there is a slightly bigger portion pressed into the body, and the body is hexed all the way up. And all three of these work good. My favorite would be this one. Nice, simple, no chrome to flake off, no, you know, it's small and so on. Now, here are some cheap imitations. And again, I liken these cheap imitations of the Yamaha fuel fittings to people trying to make counterfeits of my kit, a cobbled up mess. And the quickest way to notice is if you look right here, where this piece is pressed into the main body, it isn't stepped up bigger. And what that does is it allows air to be sucked in around this. In fact, some of these are so poorly made that, okay, there you go. I just pulled it apart with no tools. You'll notice that, again, There's no larger area on it. Okay, that one came apart with no tools. Fine quality imitation junk. Okay, here's one. Again, there's a lip on it. And it does not come off. And that's what you're looking for. No air leaks. As I covered earlier, air leaks are the main problems with my kits. And I just wanted to show you a little bit about the component quality. And again, if you're buying one of my kits, you're going to get all high quality components because I've been doing this for years and I know who makes good stuff and who does not make good stuff. And I just don't have the time to mess with junk like this. So if you need a replacement, you can either order it from me or follow the instructions I gave you when you go to purchase one. Make sure that it is stepped flange, and you can't see that over the internet. So I don't recommend you ordering them over the internet, Amazon.com, because the photographs won't show you that tiny little detail. Okay, so the average situation is customer calls and says, my generator starts and runs good when I first start it up, but after running for, we'll say, 10 minutes to 2 hours or whatever, it starts surging and then dies. And when I pump the prime bulb, it starts running again fine. And for some reason, customers always assume it's the fuel pump. And I'll tell you right now, I have never, ever had not even a single fuel pump failure. I have sent out fuel pumps to about 4 customers only because they insisted upon it. And you send them a fuel pump, they put it in, and it's still got the same exact problem, and now they're willing to listen to me as I walk them through it. So, there are a couple of points that I missed on my original fine-tuning troubleshooting video. We'll say that you have primed your fuel system as it shows in the product demo video, and then you start your generator and run it for a certain period of time, whether it's 5 minutes or a couple of hours, and then it surges and dies. What you need to do is look at the fuel filter, and if the fuel filter is out of fuel, then that's a sure sign that you've got an air leak. And let me explain this a little bit. Number one, when you listen to the generator when it stalls, if it runs out of fuel, it will almost always surge just a little bit before it dies. It may not surge for a long period of time. It may only surge a couple of times, but that's typical that it will surge. So if you look at your fuel filter after it has stalled, the first thing to do is establish a baseline. And by that, you reprime the system, make certain that you get the fuel filter full of fuel, and then start it up and run it till it stalls again. And then, if it has stalled again, you check and see if the fuel filter is full of fuel or empty. If the fuel filter is empty, it's a sure sign that number one, the pump is installed correctly and that the pump is functioning. Because if the pump were incorrectly installed or had failed, it would still be full of fuel, the same fuel that was in it when you first primed it, but still full of fuel. If the pump is installed correctly and the pump is working, it sucks the fuel out of the filter through the pump and then into the carburetor. If the pump is working and there is no air leak and there's a restriction at the input side, it will suck the prime bulb flat. If you think about that for a minute, it'll make sense to you. If it can't suck air or fuel in, it'll suck the prime bulb flat and install. If there is an air leak in the fuel tank or in the hose, it will suck air in through that, and you'll see the filter is full of air because the hose doesn't make its own air. It either sucks fuel in or air, whichever one is the easiest. And if it sucks air in, you will see that the fuel filter is full of air. And then it's up to following the rest of the procedures in this video to determine where it's sucking the air in at. The next point that I'd like to make is that it's the most common place for them to suck air is in the fittings at the top of the tank. I see that so often. In my video, I'd like to show you a quicker, simpler method to try and narrow down where the leak is. There's an arrow on the prime bulb, and it points in the direction of fuel flow. This end hooks to the generator, and this end snaps into a quick disconnect fitting in the fuel tank, like so. If you, nice, new and tight. If you unscrew this fuel fitting from the tank and then snap it into your fuel hose, like so. Then open the lid from the fuel tank and push this whole thing down into the fuel tank below the level of the fuel. So that, say, fuel is up to here and everything below here is covered in gasoline. Then reprime the system and start it up and run it. If the problem goes away, you know that it was sucking air either at this crimp or at this fitting, or where this is threaded into the nylon, or where the lift tube goes into the tank. And at that point, you would proceed with the rest of my video, or excuse me, continue watching, because this is an update to the video and it is not very cleverly edited into it. But at any rate, those two items needed to be put in my fine-tuning and troubleshooting video, so I will go ahead and update the video and get moving. We're not going to use any special tools other than 2 pairs of locking pliers to do the entire troubleshooting procedure. The first thing you'll do, and I'm going to use a used fuel hose because most of the customers' fuel hoses are going to be used. The first step is disconnect the fuel hose from the generator. Then, on the end that hooks to the generator, not the end that hooks to the fuel tank, push in on the ball and then squeeze the prime bulb. Gotta get something I can push in there. My fat fingers don't want to fit in there. Spray it in the trash can just in case there's gasoline in it. But yeah, there's gasoline in it. Then with the prime bulb completely flat, release this end. Once both ends are released, turn loose the prime bulb. Now let's go to the fuel tank itself. And I'm going to start with a brand new tank, and you'll see exactly why in a couple of minutes. This is a brand new fuel tank, and theoretically it's going to be in perfect condition. This will absolutely be no problems whatsoever. You notice I said theoretically. So now I'm going to take a fuel fitting and I'm going to use the one with the step on it, which is a better quality. And you can either screw it on without pulling this out or with pulling this out, doesn't matter. But you're going to screw the fuel fitting into the lift tube. Okay, so now the fuel fitting is screwed into the lift tube. And this would then be screwed into the top of the fuel tank, and it would pull fuel out. Once you've checked the fuel hose for an air leak, you'll remove the fitting. Now this is a Moeller 6-gallon fuel tank, so you see how this one comes out. The big names are Moeller, Tempo, and Atwood, and some of the others have, we'll say, 4 screws screwing a black nylon fitting to the top of the tank. And there's different ways that it's done, but you'll notice the tank is red plastic, the fuel fitting screws into a black plastic, so you know it's 2 different pieces, and that way you can remove the lift tube. Some lift tubes are straight like this, some are angled, some have a filter, some do not. But you'll take the lift tube out, and then with the lift tube out, take your fuel hose and hook it to the pickup tube. Then you'll take and depress this ball like I showed earlier. Let me see if I can get a fingernail in there. And it's going to spray a little bit of gasoline when we do this. But then you will squeeze the bulb completely flat. Once the bulb is completely flat, you'll release this ball. Then put your thumb over the lift tube and then release it, and it should stay flat for 2 minutes. You notice it's not. This is a brand new fuel tank. I just pulled it out of the box. This piece right here is the cause of 90% of the failures in my kit. Excuse me, of the failures that people who buy my kit will experience. I do not sell fuel tanks with my kits because it seems that no 2 people want the exact size tank, and if you did order a tank from me, you'd be paying to ship a tank or box of air across the country. It's better to get your tanks locally, either Bass Pro Shops or your local marina or whatever. Here's where they leak air at. If you'll notice, we'll go ahead and separate the screw-in fitting so you can get a better look at it. And on the Moeller, it's just a split piece. The lift tube itself is either pressed or glued on. The lift tube is PVC plastic, and this is nylon. But you'll notice it spins. In fact, it pulls right loose. Some of them are glued, and they work a little better for a short period of time. The problem is a lot of the fuels have alcohol in them, and if you're buying fuel that says no alcohol, let me give you some information on that. In the state of Florida, if it is less than 10% alcohol by volume, they're allowed to put alcohol free. 0 alcohol in the pump if it's less than 10%. So you could still be getting 9.99% alcohol in your fuel and not know it. And don't ask the poor kid behind the counter at the gas station, because he doesn't honestly know. He's doing the same thing you're doing. He's reading the pump, it says no alcohol. And of course he believes it. He doesn't realize that they're lying to him. At any rate, so we now know that we have a leak. And because we just pulled this off, and it was so easy to pull off, we can suspect that that was the leak. And I'll tell you something right now. This location is 95% of the tech calls that I get. And I'm going to show you how to fix this. Don't take the tank back and return it, because the new tank they give you is going to have the exact same problem. Now what I'd like to do is the same test over, but I'm going to put my thumb here just to make sure it's not leaking between the brass fuel port and this. So we want to check for leaks all the way along. So again, we're going to take and depress this ball with one hand, that little brass ball on the end of it, and you got to push it in, and you'll feel it go in just a little bit, and then squeeze the prime bulb, and you'll get gasoline squirting out of that. But you got to depress that bulb, and my fat fingers aren't quite getting in there. Okay, there it goes. And again, I got the prime bulb squeezed. Then I'm going to release this so that this will lock off. And then I'm going to put my thumb over the end of this nylon piece. And then I'm going to release the prime bulb. and it should stay flat for 2 minutes. And it's staying nicely flat. I'm not going to use up 2 minutes of video, and my thumb is going to have an imprint of the end of this when I take it off. But you'll notice when I take my thumb off, it's going to go ahead and pop out. And you'll see what it does to your thumb. So you can either push against your hand or put it against a bench and push it against your hand. You'll have a sore spot on your hand for a few minutes. And that's not a big deal. It's not an injury. It just leaves an imprint in it. Okay. As I said earlier quickly, do not, if you have, and this is 95% of what you're going to get, is this problem right here. Don't go returning the fuel tank to wherever you bought it or something like that, because they didn't know. They didn't realize there was a problem with it. And how does this happen? Well, if you're using this for a boat and you've got a 100 horsepower engine with a large crankcase and large displacement, the pulse pump that pumps it is much heavier, so you can afford to lose a few cc's of air leak, where like this engine is 212 cc's. It's a 6-horse engine. A 6-horse engine produces a lot less pulse wave, and the fuel pumps on it are a lot less gallons per minute than they are on a 100-horse engine. So it leaks with an outboard too. But if you're sucking, say, 15 gallons per minute and you get 1 gallon of air per minute, still not a big deal. With this, it uses maybe 1 gallon of gas in 6 hours. So it's pulling very little fuel because the engine doesn't use that much. But on this application, so instead of sucking a half a gallon of air per hour, which is not going to affect an outboard at all because it's pulling so much fuel, a half a gallon of air per hour, that engine's getting no fuel. So at any rate, as I said, don't go buying or don't go calling a fuel company because they're going to give you another tank just like it. And it's an honest issue. They just don't know that there's a problem, especially the poor person working at the store. The solution is to go to Lowe's or Home Depot or whoever your local do-it-yourself store is and get a section of 1/2 copper stiff wall pipe, not the coiled up pipe, but the stiff wall 1/2 inch copper. Measure the length of your original pickup tube. And if yours is the type of pickup tube that goes down and curves at an angle, what you want to do is measure the top of the fuel tank to the bottom and just put a pickup tube that goes straight down. But you'll take, on the molar, it uses 1/2 inch copper. I knew that ahead of time because I've done so many of these for customers. They bring it in and sure enough it's leaking inside the fuel tank and I'm kind of used to it. If you pull your pickup tube out of yours and it has the sock on the end and you pull the sock off and do the same test with your thumb over the end of the pickup tube, I think those are like 3/8 copper tubing, works good on those. But at any rate, if you take your original PVC lift tube down to your local home improvement center and match it up with a copper fitting. Now my tubing cutter is bent a little bit, so if you're a plumber and you notice the glitch in how I do this, please just bear with me and understand that yes, I know my tubing cutter is bent a little bit and that's why I'm going to be doing it this way. So we're going to mark it off to the same, and unfortunately this tubing cutter doesn't track straight, it kind of barber poles, so I'm going to be taking it back and forth instead of spinning it round and round. And again, that's because my tubing cutter is broke. You can use a hacksaw to cut the tubing if you want. You'll just have more metal filings. Looks like I dropped it too. There's a chip out of it. But at any rate, so you'll cut your piece of copper tubing to the length that you need it to be. And then use a repairman's reamer to just cut a slight chamfer on the inside. acid chamfer. And now you'll notice that this just barely, where the chamfer is, fits over the taper here. Then you'll set this on a workbench, put this end on it, drive it on with a hammer. Now, it doesn't matter what kind of a fuel you're using, I guarantee that the gasoline is not going to dissolve or soften the copper pipe at all. We'll slide the seal ring back on it. And now we'll try our test again. If this wasn't quite tight enough, what you do is wrap Teflon tape, and we're going to get to that in a minute. If this one doesn't quite seal, but you'll press the prime bulb, or excuse me, you'll press the ball in the end of this first, and then you'll squeeze the hose completely flat. Then you'll release this ball. And then put your thumb over the end of the copper pipe. And then release this. And we're still sucking air. So because we've tested this right here at this end with your thumb, and it wasn't leaking, so you know that this fitting isn't leaking, this fitting isn't leaking, here it isn't leaking, and so on. It's still right here. Not quite a tight enough fit. So my kits come with the Teflon tape that you're going to use on all the threaded fittings. And unfortunately, because this fuel tank, I'm going to have to say it's outside of the specifications. Take and wrap the Teflon tape, and don't go all the way over the end, but go right up to the end. And I use Teflon tape instead of any glues, because the glues are going to have a tendency to be dissolved by alcohol-based fuels. In fact, gasoline is a pretty good solvent on its own. And you'd have to get an adhesive that you knew to be fuel-proof. So we're going to wrap several layers of Teflon tape on this one. And when we drive the pipe on it, it's going to shear, so you're going to have some Teflon tape built up here too. So let's get our chamfered end. And that would be this end. That actually drives on pretty easily. I just pushed it on my hand, which I don't like. It's going on that easily. Okay. Getting a little bit harder. I still may not have enough Teflon tape on there, but you see the principle of it. And now that's why I'm doing this video. It's because a lot of people have a difficult time understanding that a leak inside the fuel tank can cause all their problems. Again, I'm going to depress the bulb and squeeze the prime ball flat. Okay, you notice the prime ball is squeezed flat. Okay. Looks like it's getting there now. And you want to time it and go for 2 minutes. For the purpose of this video, you can see the principle of it, and that's holding. So we'll take it off. But at any rate, if you use copper tubing, which is solid and it's not going to go anywhere, and then wrap the Teflon tape, and you get a roll of Teflon tape, and it's a whole roll. It's not just one of those little sample 6-inch long pieces. Okay, if you've got one of my kits that you are experiencing problems from it not running for very long, this is the cause of 90% of them right here. 95% will be air leaks. So that's 5% of air leaks at some other location, but still air leaks nonetheless. And we'll get on to those now. So we'll go ahead and put this back together. And actually, for this video purpose, we're done with the fuel tank. And again, as you just saw, the Atwood, oh, I got that wrong spot. The Moeller fuel tank, excuse me, uses 1/2 inch copper. But if you take the old lift tube with you to the home improvement store, you'll be able to get the appropriate sized piece of copper for whatever brand tank you have. Okay, now as I indicated earlier, the only special tools you're going to need are going to be locking pliers. So once you get this resolved, if you have this problem, your best bet is to go ahead and fire the generator up and run it for 3, 4, 5 hours, whatever, and make sure that the problem is resolved. If the problem isn't truly resolved, then you go to the next step of the troubleshooting procedure. And you're going to hook the hose up backward. You'll notice that there is a fuel tank icon on the end that goes toward the fuel tank. So you're going to hook it up to the generator input side. And what you're going to do is you're going to pull a vacuum on the fuel system. And if there's any leaks in the fuel system, it'll suck air. So the first thing we do is we shut the fuel valve off. And then we take one of the pairs of fuel or clamping pliers, and we're going to clamp the fuel hose that goes to the carburetor. And of course, that's going to be the output on the fuel pump itself. Now, each of the kits and generators are slightly different in their outside appearance. However, the principle is the same on all of them. So on the Predator, let me get a flashlight. This is the output on the fuel pump. So this goes from the pump and to the carburetor. This one right here goes from the input port to the fuel filter and then on to the fuel pump. So that's the input side of the pump. So we're going to clamp the output line on the pump, and we're going to clamp it off completely. So now with the fuel selector valve closed, and this put to suck air out of the system. Now keep in mind, the volume that we're working with here is quite a bit larger, so when we squeeze this prime bulb flat, even if there's no air leaks whatsoever, it's going to pull a vacuum on the rest of this, so it's going to pop almost completely out. But then it'll hold steady. So we're going to squeeze or push in on the ball, squeeze the prime bulb flat, release this so it locks this end off, and then this is going to pop out somewhat. And you should be able to leave this for 2 minutes without it popping all the way out. And this, the 2-minute rule is basically so that you can see if there's a really tiny leak. And we're going to say that this one popped out. So to duplicate that, we're going to go ahead and remove these pliers. Okay, this one's holding real good, even with the pliers off. That's because the float bowl is full of gasoline, so the needle is closed on this one, so it's not sucking it in through the carburetor vent tube. Okay, there it is, just a little bit sucked into the carburetor vent tube. But that's why it popped out now when I removed this hose. But we'll say if it popped out with this clamp in place, the next step would be to go closer to the source to narrow it down. So if you had it clamped here and it popped out while it was clamped here, the next step would be to bypass the fuel pump and clamp it here, which is on the input side of the fuel pump, and then do it again. Not quite shut. Okay, we have a system that's pulling air now when it wasn't earlier. Okay. It's because I didn't have the hose clamp completely shut here. And again, you're going to want to watch, and it should stay flat for 2 minutes. Now, like I said, because the system is a larger volume, it'll pop out, you know, like halfway. But we're going to say, for the illustration here, that when you had it clamped here, it popped out immediately, but here it does not. Then you'd know that the problem was between here and here. Either one of the clamps that goes into the fuel pump or in the diaphragm of the fuel pump or whatever. But right now it's clamped off before the fuel pump. So, and we'll say that it was popping out here. And if it's popping out here, but where it goes in, it's not, then I'll tell you, and this is the second most common portion of the problems. Again, the most common portion is leaking right here at the top of the lift tube. The second most common location is when you assembled the kit, and I'm showing this type of fitting. On the Predator, it's a straight fitting and so on. But where you screwed the hose barb to the fuel fitting, not putting enough Teflon tape, and it's actually sucking air around the threads of the Teflon tape. So the solution to that, and what you do is you just keep moving the pliers closer and closer and closer. And I don't want to make this video so long that it bores people, but you move it closer and closer to the source. And if it leaks at one point and then you move it to the next point and it doesn't leak there, then you know the problem is between those two locations. But as I say, I'll give you a hint. The second most common location is right here, and that covers about 5% of the problems. So 90% of them are right there on the fuel tank. 5% of them are right here at this one location here. The rest of them are clamps and stuff like that causing it to suck air. You notice that this one is still flat. The next thing I'd like to cover is, and that's on the fuel side, is on the pulse wave side. Like on the Predators, people not putting this clamp on the valve cover correctly will cause it to leak air on the air side instead of the fuel side. On the Hondas, remember the valve cover on my Honda kits, the valve covers are stamped steel, and I give you a stiff piece of hose that has to be pressed into the valve cover. A lot of people say that's difficult to do, so they find another piece of hose they've got laying around that's a softer wall. And of course, it leaks air between the valve cover and the hose. So please use all the components from my kit. Don't substitute any just because they're easier to install. I've been doing this for years, and I have found which vendors' products are good, which vendors' products are not good, and the best way to have a trouble-free life on this. Remember, if it takes you 10 minutes longer to install, because it was easier, it doesn't help you. The whole purpose is it doesn't matter how long it takes you to do it, as long as it absolutely works perfectly. And nobody wants to go camping or working or whatever and have something not work perfectly. That's what we strive for as humans, is we just want a relaxing camping trip. So please use all the components that I installed, or excuse me, sent with my kit, and install the components exactly the way that I state to install them, and you should have trouble-free operation. As I said, 90% of the problems can be found right here. Another 5% can be found right here. And then the last 5%, somewhere along the route, a clamp not tightened down correctly, or a hose slid out of place. It just runs a myriad of issues. But this technique of using the hose as a vacuum pump will sort it out and allow you to find where it's at. Once again, if you have any problems with your system and you've done these tests and it hasn't resolved the issue, please give me a call, and my contact information is in the description section. If you've already bought one of my kits, then you know my contact information because you've probably been in touch with me. I thank you for your time.